My neighbor stole my parking spot, and he had to pay $1.5 million. He thought stealing my parking spot was a minor inconvenience. I made sure that one arrogant decision cost him $1.5 million and almost everything he owned. This is the Unlucky Tuesday. I am the original poster, OP, of this story. Today we dive into a pro-revenge scenario that proves sometimes a neighbor's smug arrogance will destroy their future. You might think a parking space isn't worth much, but the antagonist in this story had to pay a monumental sum simply because he decided to occupy a piece of asphalt that wasn't his. The events took place after I moved into my new high-end apartment complex. Owning 2 private adjacent parking spots was a priceless asset, clearly marked in my deed. Remember that detail, clearly marked. My problems began when Mr. Sterling moved in. Mr. Sterling was a successful man who believed money granted him impunity. He owned a luxury SUV, and on the first morning after he arrived, I found his SUV parked squarely in my second parking spot. I politely knocked on his door and explained that spot 42B was mine. Mr. Sterling, in his expensive suit, gave me a dismissive look. "I know," he sneered, "but you have 2 spots, and your big truck already takes up half of the other one. I'll use this spot temporarily until I find one of my own." I told him to move his car or I would call the HOA. Mr. Sterling laughed. "Go ahead, I'll deal with it later," and slammed the door shut. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a parking spot. It was about proving a principle. And Mr. Sterling had just made his first mistake, underestimating his opponent. That mistake cost him $1.5 million. But before taking action, I needed to learn the rules of the game. After Mr. Sterling slammed the door, I didn't waste time trying to reason with him again. I immediately did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I called the HOA office. The property manager, a woman named Carol, assured me that this was an open and shut case. She promised she would leave a violation notice on the windshield and email Mr. Sterling directly, citing the specific clause in the HOA rules regarding private deeded parking spaces. I felt a brief sense of relief. The system would work. I waited 2 days. The violation notice, a bright orange sticker, was right where Carol said it would be, plastered prominently on Mr. Sterling's windshield. But his luxury SUV was still firmly in my spot. Not only that, when I saw him that evening, he was simply peeling off the orange sticker, crumpling it into a ball, and tossing it onto the ground near my truck. He gave me a condescending look that clearly said, "The rules don't apply to the successful." I called Carol again, sounding much less polite this time. "Carol, he ignored the notice. What's the next step? Towing?" Carol sighed. "Normally, yes, but Mr. Sterling claims there was a verbal agreement with the previous owner of your unit that he could use that spot. He's causing a major headache, and he's threatening a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment." This was pure intimidation. The HOA, being financially cautious and risk-averse, was already stalling. I knew then that waiting for the management to act was pointless. Mr. Sterling was a bully who knew exactly how to leverage bureaucracy and fear of litigation. I realized I had to shift my strategy from compliance to malicious compliance, and from a polite request to a meticulously planned pro-revenge. I needed to find a weapon that the HOA couldn't ignore, and that Mr. Sterling couldn't lawyer his way out of. My weapon was not a tow truck, but paperwork. I went deep.
I spent the next entire weekend reviewing my own purchase agreement, the full stack of HOA documents, and buying a highly detailed survey map of the entire complex from the local land registry office. And most importantly, I researched obscure legal precedents related to easements and abandoned property. This was no longer about a parking spot. It was about proving a principle. You cannot steal what is legally deeded to another person, especially when they have the means and intelligence to fight back. In the process of my deep dive, I discovered an error. Not Mr. Sterling's mistake, but the HOA's mistake. A tiny overlooked administrative error concerning the physical layout of the parking lot itself that had been lying dormant for 30 years. And that tiny error was about to cost my arrogant neighbor $1.5 million.
Let's talk about the administrative error I found, because this is where a simple parking dispute escalated into a potential 7-figure liability. Remember I said I procured a highly detailed 30-year-old survey map from the local land registry? Most people assume that when you buy a condo unit, the parking space you see on the asphalt physically matches what's written on the deed. 99% of the time, they do, but in that 1% of cases, like mine, they don't. My complex was built decades ago. When the HOA eventually repainted the parking lot a decade later, they decided to slightly reorient the parking stripes. This reorientation was intended to be helpful, to better accommodate larger vehicles in the guest areas. But this shift led to a critical, tiny overlap error. In the original, legally recorded deed map, my two spots, 42A and 42B, were drawn as perfect rectangles. But when they repainted the lines, they shifted the entire row 1 foot to the right. Here is the bombshell. The painted line for spot 42B on the asphalt was now 1 foot over the actual legal boundary line recorded in the deed. 1 foot might sound insignificant, but legally, that foot was no longer part of my deeded property. It was technically undeeded common property belonging to the entire HOA. And the rest of spot 42B, where Mr. Sterling was parking his SUV, it turned out that the new painted lines put the majority of the second spot's area directly onto a section of land that was deeded as an exclusive pedestrian access easement, a small walkway guaranteed by law to remain clear for foot traffic. I reread the HOA rules regarding the easement. Any obstruction placed on the exclusive pedestrian access easement, regardless of size or permanence, is subject to immediate and comprehensive removal and a fine of up to $10,000 per day without prior notice. My neighbor, Mr. Sterling, wasn't just parking in my spot. He was parking on a legally protected walkway. The HOA had mistakenly been letting residents park there for years, completely unaware of the old deed boundary. Suddenly, I had two powerful, undeniable weapons: a clear administrative error and a massive HOA fine structure that had never been enforced. I immediately hired a very expensive, highly specific property rights attorney, not to file a lawsuit, but to draft and send a single, highly technical certified letter to Mr. Sterling, copying the HOA's legal department. The letter didn't mention my name, only the specific legal code. This was the quiet, precise opening move of a devastating three-part strategy. My expensive property rights attorney crafted the letter perfectly. It was a masterpiece of legal malice and precision. The letter was sent via certified mail to 3 recipients: Mr. Sterling, the head of the HOA, and the HOA's legal counsel. Crucially, the letter did not come from me, OP.
It came solely from the law firm, citing specific state property codes and referencing the original 30-year-old deed map that contained the administrative error. The letter outlined that parking a vehicle on the property currently used as Spot 42B was a direct and continuous obstruction of a legally registered pedestrian access easement. It didn't mention my parking dispute. It simply stated the HOA was required by law to maintain the easement and strictly enforce the penalties outlined in its own governing documents. The penalty, as required by the HOA's own rules, a $10,000 fine per day for the obstruction, retroactive to the date the obstruction began, plus all legal fees. I knew Mr. Sterling had been parking there for 35 consecutive days at that point. The quick calculation was terrifying. 35 days multiplied by $10,000 per day. That was $350,000 already. The letter demanded the HOA take immediate and decisive action. The reaction from the recipients was immediate and dramatically chaotic. The HOA's legal counsel responded first. They were terrified. An oversight in the original deed maps could expose the entire association to massive liability from every single homeowner in the complex if they failed to act immediately. They were facing an existential threat to the HOA itself, and my parking dispute had suddenly become the hottest legal potato in the county. The HOA's lawyer contacted Mr. Sterling's lawyer within an hour, demanding compliance. Mr. Sterling, however, reacted with pure fury. He didn't read the letter. He only saw the $10,000 daily fine and the ominous law firm headerlead. He assumed I had hired a fancy lawyer simply to force him to move his car. He saw it as a massive, petty escalation over a trivial piece of asphalt. He stormed over to my apartment, slamming his fist on my door, yelling something about frivolous lawsuits and petty neighbors. I simply opened the door, looked him dead in the eye, and calmly handed him a copy of the official deed map. "Your car is parked on a legally protected walkway, Mr. Sterling. Your fight is no longer with me. It's with the entire homeowners association and the law." I closed the door on his bewildered, enraged face. His jaw dropped. He realized he had just picked a fight with the wrong person over the wrong piece of land. The next morning, his car was gone from Spot 42B, but the debt was just beginning to accrue.
The fallout from the certified letter was spectacular. Mr. Sterling's lawyer immediately argued that the fine was punitive and disproportionate. His primary defense was that the HOA was negligent for 30 years by failing to mark the easement correctly and allowing residents to use it. The lawyer argued that since Mr. Sterling was following the painted lines provided by the HOA, the association was responsible for the fine, not him. The demand, $350,000 for the 35 days of obstruction, should be nullified. The HOA's lawyer, terrified of a massive class action lawsuit from all homeowners due to the deed error, argued back just as fiercely. They conceded their administrative error, but maintained that the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, clearly stated that a homeowner must adhere to the legal deed map, not the painted lines. Furthermore, the easement rule was absolute. Any obstruction is a violation, regardless of prior negligence. This turned into a bitter, high-stakes legal battle, entirely separate from me. The war was now HOA versus Mr. Sterling. My role was simple: defense and observation. I had my lawyer send a second letter to the HOA,
This one was less aggressive and more protective. It stated that while the HOA was addressing the legal violations, my property rights needed to be secured. The letter requested 3 things, which served as my insurance policy. Immediate remediation. The HOA must physically remove the conflicting painted lines and clearly mark the easement with permanent bollards or planters to prevent any future obstructions. A written guarantee. A formal written guarantee that no current or future resident would ever be allowed to park in either of my deeded spots, 42A and 42B. No retaliation. A contractual agreement that the HOA would not fine, sue, or in any way penalize me, OP, for bringing the original administrative error to their attention. The HOA, desperate to avoid a lawsuit for me that would add to their rapidly mounting legal costs, agreed to all 3 demands instantly. I had legally secured my property and neutralized the HOA as a potential threat. This entire legal skirmish forced Mr. Sterling to pay his own mounting legal fees just to fight the HOA's claim, but the debt of $350,000 was still on the table. Mr. Sterling, now realizing the gravity of the situation, offered a desperate compromise. He offered to move his car permanently, pay a $10,000 penalty as a settlement, and sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, on the matter. The HOA refused. Their legal counsel explained the chilling reason why.
The reason the HOA flatly refused Mr. Sterling's $10,000 settlement offer was simple, but devastating. It was a matter of legal survival for the association itself. If the HOA accepted a nominal $10,000 settlement, they would essentially be admitting 2 critical things in court. First, that the $10,000 per day fine stipulated in their own CC&Rs was arbitrary and disproportionate. Second, and far more dangerously, they would be admitting they were negligent for 30 years and were simply trying to minimize their public relations damage. The HOA's biggest fear was not Mr. Sterling. It was a class action lawsuit from every other homeowner in the complex. The deed error, the 1-foot shift, meant that the HOA had potentially misrepresented property boundaries to hundreds of residents for decades. The HOA's lawyer's chilling reasoning was this: they must enforce the full $350,000 fine against Mr. Sterling to establish a powerful legal precedent. Enforcing the rules strictly, even retroactively, proved to a judge and all other homeowners that the HOA was acting responsibly and diligently to correct the 30-year-old mistake and protect the legal integrity of the easement. This strict enforcement, paradoxically, was the HOA's only defense against lawsuits for much bigger liabilities. Mr. Sterling's fate was sealed. He was forced to be the scapegoat to protect the entire association from bankruptcy. He and his lawyer had 2 options: pay the $350,000 fine or fight the HOA in court. They chose to fight. They countersued the HOA, alleging gross negligence and seeking to invalidate the retroactive fines. This is where the $1.5 million figure finally enters the scene. My lawyer, still working quietly in the background, noticed that Mr. Sterling's countersuit now made the administrative deed error a matter of public court record in a contested legal battle. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Mr. Sterling's biggest mistake was not parking in my spot. It was trying to fight the HOA. His countersuit, intended to nullify the $350,000 fine, achieved the opposite. It guaranteed that the administrative deed error became a major contested legal issue attached to his property's location. And it was now public. This was my final piece of leverage. I had my attorney perform one last critical step,
A targeted, anonymous filing with the title insurance company handling the sale of Mr. Sterling's $1.5 million penthouse. The filing didn't contain anything defamatory, only cold, hard facts. A copy of the original deed map, the relevant HOA CC&Rs, and the public court docket showing the active lawsuit between Mr. Sterling and the HOA regarding the property boundaries and easements. When a title company sees an active lawsuit involving property boundaries, fines totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a challenged HOA governing document, they classify the title as clouded. They cannot insure a clouded title. Without title insurance, a bank will not issue a mortgage, and a high-value sale simply cannot proceed. The phone call from the title company came the very next day. The potential buyer, who was ready to close the $1.5 million deal, was immediately spooked. His own lawyer informed him that proceeding would be financial suicide. The buyer pulled out of the sale entirely, citing the uninsurable title due to the severe pending legal dispute with the Homeowners Association. Mr. Sterling lost the $1.5 million sale. Just like that. But that was only half of his ruin. The HOA was still aggressively pursuing the $350,000 fine. They were winning the legal battle because their argument, enforced the rule strictly to protect the association, was stronger than his argument. HOA was negligent first. He was financially trapped. He had lost his massive profit and was still obligated to pay the massive penalty. I saw Mr. Sterling a week later in the hallway. He looked pale, gaunt, and defeated. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and the arrogance was completely gone. He stopped me. "You did this," he hissed, his voice trembling. I looked at him calmly. "You broke the law, Mr. Sterling. You parked your car where you shouldn't have, and when you threatened the HOA survival, they came after you. Your mistake was never dealing with me. Your mistake was assuming you were above the law." He had nothing left to say. The war was over. But the final irony of the story is how the HOA decided to collect its $350,000.
The final irony of the story lies in the HOA's collection method. Since Mr. Sterling's penthouse sale had failed, the HOA knew he didn't have the immediate cash to pay the $350,000 fine, plus the legal fees they incurred fighting his countersuit, fees that he was legally obligated to cover. The HOA didn't sue him personally for the cash. Instead, they did the most damaging thing legally possible. They placed a massive HOA lien on his penthouse unit. For those unfamiliar, a lien is a legal claim against an asset. It essentially means that Mr. Sterling could not sell, refinance, or transfer the ownership of his $1.5 million penthouse until the HOA fine, now totaling closer to $450,000 with legal costs, was paid in full. The lien officially registered the debt against the property, securing the HOA's claim. Mr. Sterling was trapped. He was forced to continue owning the very property that had become his financial ruin. Eventually, he had no choice but to take out a high-interest loan against his other assets to clear the lien and make the title marketable again. He paid the HOA every last dime, including my lawyer's minor administrative costs, which were bundled into the association's fees. Mr. Sterling sold the penthouse 6 months later, but he sold it at a loss, having already sunk $500,000 into clearing the lien and paying his own failed legal battle. My revenge was complete. I got my parking spot back, legally secured forever with permanent bollards placed by the HOA. More importantly, I saw a person who believed he was above the law pay the full, monumental price for his arrogance. His attempt to intimidate me cost him the better part of $500,000 in cash and nearly $1.5 million in lost opportunity. The legal system works, but sometimes you have to be the one to show the powerful exactly how it works.
If you enjoyed seeing high-stakes justice served with cold, calculated precision, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever won a costly battle against an arrogant neighbor or an overzealous HOA? Share your best story in the comments below.